Finally watched the Snow White live-action remake, and to no one's surprise, it was terrible. Snow White basically repeats every single mistake all Disney remakes have committed for the past 10 years, of trying to reshape and change the story while keeping the core aspects of the original film, but in a stained, ugly, and corrupted way. I know this can be sad about every single Disney remake, but what differentiates this remake from the rest is that Snow White was the one animated movie that made all other Disney animations possible, only for almost 90 years later that same animation, so treasured by its creator, to be shamelessly ridiculed and disfigured by the current state of Walt Disney Studios. So with that being said, let's talk about it. The movie literally begins by explaining the reason behind Snow White's name. So the reason why she was named like that is because there was a snowstorm on the day she was born.
You guys are talking?
Since Disney changed tons of stuff from the original 1937 film in this dumb and soulless remake, then why not change her name to just Snow instead of Snow White anyway? Given that changing her name's origins in this remake only made more obvious the desperation of justifying why a non-white actress was chosen to play the role of a character whose name is originally a metaphor to how white her skin was. But skin color was never relevant to fictional characters, they've said. It'll never stop being funny how Disney chose a woman 1,000 times more beautiful than the actress playing the one who's supposed to be the fairest of them all. So Snow White has become more beautiful than the Queen because of her gentle grace, which the mirror later explains as the beauty of her heart at the end of the film.
For Snow White, beauty comes from deep within.
Plus, it makes no sense for Snow White to be deemed more beautiful than the Queen because of the kindness of her heart, because 1. If kindness is a criteria that settles Snow White being superior to the Queen in terms of beauty, then the Queen wouldn't be the second most beautiful person on Earth. She would be the last one. 2. The Queen ordering Snow White to be murdered would make her even less beautiful compared to Snow White's heart. And 3. This movie is basically calling Snow White ugly. Look, I personally don't like Rachel Zegler. I hated how she trashed the original movie. Weird. I hate her casting as Snow White, but ouch, man, like...
Are you? Yes or no?
Freaking acting skills. So this is the context behind this picture. The dwarves are a complete disaster in this film. They're not even dwarves to begin with. They're like some random magic creatures or whatever. Thanks, Peter Dinklage, you suck. Their designs are absolutely terrible. They look freaking weird and they're also CGI made, so their design looks overall too similar, devoid of any sign of originality and uniqueness in terms of physical appearances, temperaments, and personality their characters originally had. The dwarves are also shown to be a bunch of jerks sometimes, which only made the change of their original characters even worse in this awful remake. So they completely changed the core of the song Whistle While You Work. Instead of being Snow White cleaning out the house by herself out of the kindness and gentleness of her heart for thinking that the people who lived there were orphan kids who didn't have a mom to take care of them, it's just Snow White bossing the dwarves around and making them do the cleaning. Of course, this change only works if the dwarves are socially dysfunctional, which is the case as they are shown being deeply flawed as they occasionally argue and fight each other. But this change has no reason to exist, only to make the people responsible for such script changes feel like they are absolute geniuses, when actually they're just misunderstanding and soiling the original meaning behind the scene altogether. Snow White first cleaned the house because she wanted to take care of those poor orphan kids, but when revealed that they were not kids but adults, the offer is made of Snow White taking care of the house in exchange of protection from the evil queen, and the dwarves, through the kindness of their hearts, agreed to protect her by providing and sheltering her. It was all simple, it had a logical reason, and most of all, it had genuine kindness, which is something that is entirely absent from this movie as they try to push the narrative of Snow White being destined to be a strong leader from the very beginning.
For someday, her destiny would be to lead.
And forget that Snow White's strongest character trait was her innocence and gentleness of heart. Plus, imagine knowing that the dwarves work day and night at the mines, which is a lot of heavy work that demands physical strength, and still make them do all the cleaning on top of that. Wow, Disney, thanks!
Not Jonathan, Princess. Just Jonathan.
The dialogue style of Marvel movies and their consequences have been a disaster for the movie industry. So Snow White leaves the cottage in order to find her long-lost dad, but all that is quickly forgotten and shoved aside as we're introduced to Jonathan and to their insanely sauceless romantic chemistry, if there is one to begin with. After a lame and badly choreographed fight scene between the Queen's soldiers and Jonathan and his band of filler characters, he's shot by an arrow, but all that is quickly solved as well. So the original dance scene of Snow White and the dwarves was changed so Snow White, the CGI dwarves, and the filler thieves were all dancing together, so we could have more character development between Snow White and Jonathan. But it was all useless to me, because their characters suck. Giving him a backstory of being a rebel thief fighting in the name of the king is not a synonym for having an actual personality, and Snow White has the charisma and likability of a dead fish. The scene is just a little bit over 10 seconds long, and it has almost 9 cuts to it. So the Queen gives Snow White the poisoned apple, she eats it and dies. The CGI dwarves mourning her death didn't have half of the emotions it was supposed to convey, given that Snow White and the dwarves barely had any bonds or whatsoever. She's not seen looking after them in a thoughtful and kind way. She just kept babbling about how she couldn't stay with them because she had to find her long-lost father. Even though they were shown asking her to stay, she would still turn the offer down every time, destroying every single opportunity for their characters to have any meaningful and sweet interaction that didn't solely revolve around either her father being the king or her commanding everyone around because she is the leader, because her father was the king so she was born to be a leader. Lacey Grumpy suddenly crying was nicely portrayed, I'll give it that. The whole scene looks like it had a budget of a Disney Channel movie. This is arguably the most sauceless kiss since Belle kissing the Beast's disgusting mouth in the Beauty and the Beast remake. And also, Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot assured us that Snow White wouldn't be saved by the prince.
Saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and
But she ends up getting saved by a man anyway. So even after dying and being brought back to life, she keeps babbling about being a leader and ruling or whatever for the millionth time in this movie, which is so annoying, just make it stop. Snow White shows up to face the Queen, as it was said that she's a warrior and gonna fight for her people. Except that Kristen Stewart movie did that before, and surprisingly enough, way better than this remake.
Pretty, isn't she? Delicate, elegant, exquisite.
But she has been none of those things during this whole movie.
I remember.
And I.
That must be the most anticlimactic climax I've ever seen. So the Queen dies and we get to see the cringiest ending to this movie people at Disney could have possibly come up with. And finally, this terrible movie ends. Everyone knew that Gal Gadot's acting was going to suck in this movie, given her performances from previous films. At least she looked great as a queen, even though her acting didn't. Rachel Zegler's acting freaking sucked. I was genuinely surprised with how bad her performance was. Snow White's character has no personality other than being born a natural leader because of her father, and also being sassy every now and then, which completely erases her original character traits of being kind and gentle. It's not rare to see tons of people completely misunderstanding the personalities of classic Disney princesses, inaccurately and superly accusing them of having no personality at all, or just waiting to be saved by someone else, and for being kind and gentle to be seen as weaknesses that prevent them from having a personality, when actually as modern Disney princesses in those remakes that have little to no personality at all. If we analyze how Disney princesses were portrayed for the past few years in remakes, we see how awfully similar they all are, while what made them unique and likable was taken from them. Belle, Jasmine, and Mulan are all very strong and brave characters, but the environment around them is dragging them down. Belle is stuck in a misogynist town, unable to be an inventor. Jasmine is stuck in a life that prevents her from fulfilling her life's destiny of becoming a leader, and Mulan's dad is preventing her from becoming a warrior. Personality traits that are amicable and likable, like being kind and gentle, are completely gone. Belle is frowning all the time throughout the movie, and even the deepest and tenderest of moments feel completely insipid with her face looking pissed off all the time. Jasmine is seen looking and talking to people in a self-centered and arrogant way, even to her romantic partner Aladdin, because that is a way this movie showed how Jasmine was sure of her self-worth to become a leader. And all Mulan had to do was to be a Mary Sue to show what an insanely talented warrior she was. That is all those characters had to offer in those remakes, and their personalities and life purposes revolve around being empowered. And it was no different with Snow White. But being strong and kind are not mutually exclusive things. One can be kind and brave at the same time. That is exactly what the classic Disney movies showed. There was something else in them that made them likable and iconic for decades. It is important for female characters to show sympathy and kindness. What is the point of making them so strong and empowered if their personalities suck and have the charisma of a door? Who cares if they're sassy? Their character trait has been way too overused ever since Tangled back in 2010, and it's also the same thing all the freaking time. Kindness and gentleness matter and are fondly remembered by all those who have experienced such a delicacy from others. There is a reason why classic princesses are so memorable and beloved for ages, whereas no one could care less about Emma Watson's Belle, Naomi Watson's Jasmine, Liu Fei's Mulan, and it won't be any different to Rachel Zegler's Snow White, as if her interview trashing the original movie wasn't enough. So those are my opinions on the Snow White live-action remake. This movie is a disgrace and it should have never been created. I'm glad the Snow White remake backfired terribly, but even if it made $1 billion, it would still be a forgettable mediocre movie anyway, as every single Disney remake that came to exist before it. I wish Disney would finally learn the lesson from the failure that Snow White's remake has proven to be. But tell us, we won't be living this dark age of soulless remakes anytime soon.